think we've given people enough time. This is the patient experience of the future track. As a warning that if you're hearing that for the first time, this may be the wrong room for you. I am Jonathan Podolsky. I am Vice President of Experience Strategy and Service Design at MadPow. I'm excited about this track. Patient experience is my passion. I was an architect years ago, designing the physical spaces for patient experiences, hospitals, and different procedure rooms. And over time, I evolved into actually a service designer, looking at things from more of an operation and process and experiential perspective. And so having this discussion and looking at things from where we are today, but where we could potentially be in the future, I think is an important topic of discussion, and should be rich with all the different panelists that we have here to give their perspective on this. I went to P.F. Chang's last night. This is true story, and this was in my fortune cookie. I kid you not. I don't know if I should take this I don't know if it's if it's offensive or not. Like I could have made myself a name in medicine, or I should, more like a nagging thing, like I should get try harder. But either way, it was a little bit of a freak out moment because of all the things that could be in a fortune cookie at a healthcare experience design conference in downtown Boston. This is what popped into mind. So yeah, serendipitous. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're here to talk about the future of patient experience, and for me, there's so many different ways to predict what on earth will happen, whether it's a few years out or a decade out. I originally had framed this as the future and then named it Future 2020, and then you'll see it a few times in different slides, and then a few people reminded me that 2020 is only 2.5 years away, but in my mind, 2020 sounded like 100 years in the future. I can't believe that 2020 is only 2.5 years. So yes, we could be talking about things that are just down the street, 2020, or a little bit further out in terms of what could potentially happen. I am a huge proponent in the sense of acknowledging that that the fiction of today tends to motivate the realities of tomorrow, in that there's so many different case studies where the definitions or the creativity that happens today is what drives people to eventually say, yes, I will try to make that an achievable thing. Jules Verne is that perfect example of discussing nuclear-powered submarines and many other technologies that were not even remotely close to even being feasible at the time, nor even imagined. And then eventually, here we are today in a nuclear-powered submarine. So there's so many different things that we could do, and again, I like to look at fiction, at least as part of my motivations as to where on earth would the next generation of scientists and innovators start to say, that's the thing I'm going to pick up and start to do. So modern fiction has their own rosy picture as to where on earth patient experience will be. If you're a fan, if you're a Trekkie, any Trekkies out here? No, you actually admitted it. I'm one too. Then Star Trek and other fictions of today paints I think a nice rosy picture of where the patient experience of the future is, a amalgamation of human and technology in an efficient process where physicians actually support and interact with patients. And at no time did Bones have to take 2 hours out of his day to write or update his medical records of his patients at the end, right? So that's I think a very positive photo, or an image of the future. But if you also look at what's happening in fiction, we're all going to get replaced by medical pods or medical tubes in the near future as well. That seems to be the other trend. Again, Star Trek says, no, it's going to be all about empowered technologies and empowered processes that really start to, in real time, understand what's happening, real-time diagnostic features and things of this nature. And while this is fiction that we see, a $10 million X Prize was initiated related to this. Can we even today start to build the tricorder that we see on screen as a reality? So just a few months ago, the first round of prizes for that tricorder, sorry, Boston accent came out, tricorder experience was decided on, and there was a winner out of all of that. So the first 2.5 million was actually awarded for the round one of what will eventually become the single device tricorder type solution. And that's where I think this motivation of fiction motivating reality is rather important. Or again, we'll all get replaced by tubes of robots, robotic tubes, creepy robotic tubes, or robots that make people in tubes. So there's all these. So there's two ways this could go. I hope it goes more in the sense of humanizing healthcare and how things could go, and that we don't just all just eventually just take a nap in a tube and we're all fine. I don't think that's how things will go. But that said, let's have an interesting conversation around what we think is out there and what the possibilities are. This is formatted as individual presentations with speakers, a very talented group of individuals who have different perspectives, a very wide range of perspectives on this topic. And then we'll change things up in terms of what we're going to do for the second half. It's not going to be your traditional panel conversation. It's after lunch on day 2 of a workshop, so I'm not going to have that happen in my presentation. God damn it. So let's go ahead and transition here. Just give me a few seconds here to switch slides. I apologize for that. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, and with that also to thank Boston Scientific, who is a sponsor of this track. That we very much appreciate that. So our first speaker is Sandra Nagel. She is a research fellow at Boston Scientific. She has over 11 years of industry experience, including focus on medical device innovation, technology strategy, and focus on digital health as well. She has an MS and PhD in chemistry. That's very impressive. She's been able to apply her knowledge in multiple disease states and use innovative technologies around that information and knowledge that she's gathered throughout her career. She has a very strong passion for disruptive and transformational technologies that truly push the needle and create meaningful impact and improvement towards technology and eventually towards overall improvements in healthcare. So please welcome Sandra to the stage, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Jonathan. This was probably one of the best introductions I've ever gotten. First of all, I'm really excited to be here, very proud to represent our company and to be the sponsor, but also excited to talk about the future with my fellow panelists. Really, at this point, our story is about the journey that we're taking towards how we position ourselves for the future. And as a technology company, we, and especially myself, as you've heard, in terms of passion for technology and transformation, have been looking into how are these technologies going to be positioning us and for the future to be able to actually care for the patients appropriately. So our company is dedicated to transforming patients' lives by providing medical solutions that are really improving the health and improving the health of patients globally. So in terms of numbers, we have 13,000 products. Sometimes I even gasp at that statistic. We treat more than 24 million patients each year on average, and 100+ clinical trials at any time. We challenge ourselves to find solutions that are addressing very complex clinical needs. And we work in many different disease state areas, a lot of them chronic diseases, neurology, like chronic pain, Parkinson's disease. In respiratory area, we have products for asthma. In urology and pelvic health, kidney stones or incontinence. Cardiovascular health is a big, really big focus of ours. And the examples I'm going to give today are mostly in cardiovascular health. And then in terms of digestive diseases, we focus on a lot of gastrointestinal cancers. So we're connected to our patients. As you know, a medical device company is usually focused on providing devices and solutions for physicians, but we are also connected to our patients in a quite passive way through our tools and educational websites, whether be it bronchial thermoplasty solution for a patient and a patient story that patients can look into, or awareness of clots on the left bottom that you see there. But there is so much more opportunity to actually get positioned to help the future of patients. And so one of the things that we are really focused on very heavily is the fact that there's an unprecedented amount of available data at this time. We know very well the experiences of physicians, the consolidating clinical knowledge, consolidating hospital and entities is really driving increasing complexity. So data are important and will be important to look for and provide patients with the right algorithms and solutions. So we also know, and I'll talk just a little bit about that, there's empowerment and engagement that patients are seeking right now, which is a little bit different than even a few years ago. And value-based care, we keep hearing about that all the time. So we're right now really heavily investing our resources in digital health to enable the improvements that can touch the needs in terms of improving healthcare efficiency, engaging the patients such that our physicians can provide an optimal treatment at the end of the day. But like I said, moving towards patients and moving really to understand their needs and understand how we design for them is very key. So just a little bit of statistics. We know physicians are spending very little time with their patients. However, their biggest motivation for their job is to actually help them, help people. And on the side of patients and also their caregivers, a majority feel the responsibility to take care of their own health. At the same time, they do expect, they're starting to expect healthcare integration. And surprisingly, based on these statistics right here, they're willing to provide their data in exchange for free information or support. So for us and for everyone right now here is to improve health and well-being and ultimately make sure that patients are happy. This is something that might be surprising, but Boston Scientific has been actually providing very important products for over 10 years, and these products like the cardiac pacemakers and defibrillators have been remotely communicating with patients with physicians actually, not patients, for a long time. So that's been happening over 10 years, more than 10 years. And the key here is to actually be using sophisticated sensors that are highly accurate and can be in some way predictable because they're always going to be performing the same way. If you compare them with wearables, these are really sophisticated. In addition to that, we also have chronic pain management devices, so they're generating data just like or similarly as the cardiac implants to improve information across healthcare. So right now, we are focused on some important pillars like innovation, user-centered design, but more importantly, design with and for patients, caregivers, and providers and physicians who are our long-term partners. But one really important thing that we are highlighting and really focusing on is collaboration. So if you were here yesterday, you probably heard Amy Cueva talk about the importance of collaboration, and I'll talk just a little bit about that towards the end. So I put together kind of, as a technology knowledge builder, per se, I put together a little roadmap for all of the knowledge that we're gathering in terms of, if you look from left to right, there's this patient journey from diagnostic treatment to monitoring and management. The current technologies and products are very important. They are saving lives, and they're providing a lot of really important features and really addressing things that are important for patients. But at the same time, we are in this era of so many technologies actually becoming ripe at the same time. So it's not just 3D printing or just AI. Everything is really becoming ripe at this time. And I know this has been said. There was a session just earlier today about the future of technologies. It's just an exciting time. So if you combine all of these together, maybe we're not going to get there by 2020, but there's likelihood that these technologies are going to enable a lot of healthcare in the future. So we're excited about that. Precision diagnostics, maybe in 5 to 10 years, really taking over how we manage healthcare. The omics and predictive AI and diagnostic algorithms. And then in terms of treatments, we're excited about therapies like cell and gene therapies and other minimally invasive technologies. So even more minimally invasive, even though our company has been really focused on minimally invasive, there is so much room to do even better. And we're excited about the monitoring disease management. We heard earlier today about voice recognition, text, facial recognition. Those are really important technologies that are going to be affecting how we actually deliver healthcare and how we deliver the patient experience. So now on to some examples. So this is an example of a platform that's being developed and already actually working for, it's called Advantix, and it's working out for departmental operational performance. So it's increasing, in particularly in cardiovascular suite, it's increasing performance in operations for the physicians. So even though the first step is to provide something for the physicians and the clinical entity, there is so much benefit for patients. So if you think about something like this, where utilization, using population data and insights and data analytics, we can actually provide operational cost reduction, increase in lab productivity, and turnaround time, and improvement in patient readmission. And then also, the second part is really to standardize care and to improve the experience and engagement of the patient. So these may become in future solid platform. And if you remember looking at all of the disease states that we touch as a company, there is definitely a need to provide a platform like this to any one of those disease states. And the second one, really exciting example, is HeartLogic. It's our predictive algorithm that uses multiple sensors like heart sounds, thoracic impedance, respiration rate and volume, activity, and heart rate. The crux of this solution is actually a multi-sensor approach where a pattern of sensors is used to predict whether there's congestive heart failure signs when a patient is still asymptomatic. So really exciting, 70% sensitivity. The sensitivity can be adjusted at the expense of more false positives, of course, but there's median time to predicting event is about a month. So it's quite remarkable that we can already do that. And if you think again about the rest of the disease states that we were talking about, there is opportunity to develop predictable algorithms. So one notion here that's really important is the fact that these are not solutions that you develop by just throwing the data into a classifier and getting something out. These are very carefully and very closely connected solutions that are developed together with experts and physicians, especially physicians and other experts. So there has to be a lot of thought that goes into developing every one of these algorithms. And finally, collaboration through connected patient challenge is one of the examples, but I talked a little bit about collaboration. So for the second year this year, we led a challenge or co-organized a challenge with Google and Metstro, where participants came and submitted their ideas or concepts and then pitched at an evening event. We had one of the winners, which is the company called Medumo. So there's some, a nice example of innovation there where Medumo creates a solution for patients that are getting ready for a procedure or treatment. And that solution incorporates text messaging and web-based services. So instead of downloading an app, you can just use the text messaging and web-based service. So that's really kind of an example, nice example of designing for and with the patient instead of designing in a vacuum. So collaboration to end this conversation, collaboration is really key to everything we're doing. We have a lot of other activities that are going on in more of a research stage. And we believe that we cannot do anything alone. So without collaboration in the future, we're not going to be able to develop these new solutions for the future of patient experiences. So with that, Thank you for your attention, and looking forward to the next part of the panel.
We have time just for a few seconds of questions if anybody has a question. For Sandra? Nope. Well, thank you. So up next is Johan Sonnen. He is creative director at Innovation Studios and also a lecturer of design and engineering at MIT. He's a busy fellow. Johan specializes in healthcare design and systems with a focus on open source design solutions. Some of these solutions have had quite major impacts on organizations such as the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the California Health Care Foundation, just to name a few. That list actually goes on and on. His work has also been recognized by the New York Times, Newsweek, BBC, Wired, NPR. Again, I am paraphrasing the long list of impacts that this individual has had. So welcome to the stage, Johan.
That bio is an illusion of interestingness. That's what most bios are. Go to the top. Here we go. There you go. Thank you. Howdy. My name is Johan. Thank you, Jonathan, for the intro. I pretend to run a design studio, mostly concentrating in healthcare, where about 100 million people have used the software that we have shipped. It's just not our name on it, unfortunately. And I do moonlight down the street a bit, teaching students how to design actual things. If you want to get a hold of me, I will try to be just as fast as your primary care doctor and get back to you within 2 business hours. So, humans don't want to think about health. But we can train robots to think about it, to be very vigilant in how they see it, right? For me and for my family. You know, it's all these little stupid small things that happen every day, these mindless tasks that are really bad for us to, you know, when I'm doing my time card every day or every week that I don't want to do, God, that is horrible. Think about doing that for your electronic health record. It's perfect for machines, though. Then it allows me and my colleagues and everybody else to concentrate on the good stuff, and maybe it's a little hokey, but it allows you to focus on your dreams. Now, let's do a little thought experiment here. I just want all of my data to be captured beautifully without me even knowing it. And when we have to do something with it, when I have to input it, it has to be quite lovely to do it. This is something you're seeing all over the place. You know, there's Eva here in this case, or there's Ada. Named after Ada Lovelace, which is basically just Harrison's rewritten for a computer, but it's pretty good. Or Bowie. I want to talk to my virtual doc, whether it's by multimodal talking, singing, texting. But that's how I want it to be. The data itself will be human and machine readable. It'll be my entire health record, from lust to dust. The baseline now will be as close to ground truth as possible versus now I'm sort of guessing. Oh yeah, that's I think what it is. My clinicians, when we're looking at cancer treatments down the street, they're asking their patients when the first stage was detected. I mean, insane, right? I want it to include also not just the clinical data, but all of my data. It's life data. My healthcare will help me get what I'm supposed to be doing. And it'll have these personal, ever-evolving care plans to shepherd me through the process, as well as my entire care team. And then my health status will change over time. It happens every day after that, cookie I ate today, maybe after the 14 cookies I ate this week, not so good. But that should be evolve, and the service should tell me that. Guess what, Johan, you're getting fat. Well, I can feel it, but give me the data. But that data needs to be owned by me. Needs to be co-owned, at least, at a minimum. Right now, one state in the United States has legalese around that document, around your data, that allows you to own it. That's New Hampshire, one state. I want to be able to proxy it to anybody I want. to any org, to anybody, any service, little bits, lots of bits, for any time period. I also want to see my health in advance. This is critical. Humans are really bad at seeing history and in the future. You can do it a couple ways in terms of technically. It's nice to hear Sandra talk about some of the things that you can see in the future, allow you to help you in the future. The eyeball is one place where you can look into blood vessels without cutting, and you can see, probably a dozen or so diseases in advance, right? How diabetes will manifest in you 2 years in advance with different size blood vessels. You can see it through OCT scans, right? And guess what? Just in your pocket, you can have an OCT or a fundus camera, right, for $100. It'll get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over time. And you can make that diagnosis at home or at an urgent care center way in advance. Here is, the health room. It's actually your bathroom, but I think that's going to migrate into your health room. This is in the Lancet, along with Eric Topol wrote the article, and he's using our pictures here. This is coming in the near future, where it involves no particular big behavior changes. You're going number 1 and number 2, and in between at home, right? That's a great data pickup. And so I want that captured. I'm sloughing off an amazing amount of my biome right here, right? Wow, that's gross. Okay, so let's keep going. And then I'll be able to, of course, get these flu treats. I slough off at the counter at home. It tells me in advance that I have a flu coming on. That's helpful. Then it drops my sickness rate by 50%. Rock on. Then it just appears at your corporate overlord of choice like CVS or Walgreens. So how do we get there? So let's look a little bit technically how we want to sort of break this down. There's lots of axes. This happens to be one on more the health IT side and design side. There's one all just for payment and financial components. But here's a sort of multi-layered description. And let me go through each layer here just to describe where I think what needs to happen in each of these. So I think we have to standardize health data. Right now, we don't really have any standards. We have lots of specs, but the elements themselves are not. And this is sort of a sad reflection of the United States. There's some parts of healthcare which are fantastic here. When it works great, my goodness, it's fantastic. I had my hip replaced a couple months ago, and I just feel like a new human being. And yet, here we are struggling. I've had a lot of cyborg work done. That's a whole separate talk. But here we are. The United States does not have a standard health record. Most civilized countries do. Estonia is not on this list. They have it too. You can fit it in your pocket because it lives in the cloud and on a chip in your wallet. Rock on. NHS has the summary care record. That's been in existence for some years already. It has a huge clinical adoption because they see the value, right? Switzerland, Sweden as well. And the concept here is that, look, the rules are known in baseball because the distance between home plate and first base, the distance. Every park is the same. Same with, the pitcher's mound. And the talent is what you compete on top of that. So the baseline's known. We don't have that in healthcare. Here in the United States, we're floundering on the health data component. If you want to look at one fantastic potential for this is standardhealthrecord.org. It's actually being produced in Bedford by MITRE. I would check that out, and you can go to the website. Because ultimately, we've talked, at least in health IT, a lot about how data gets from point A to B to N. And the fact that we're talking about the pipe and not what's going into it, the fluid in that pipe, is the problem. And so that's where I think we as citizens in healthcare need to really drive this point home. Okay, data completeness. How good is your health record? How good is the data in it? Do you know? Do you have any clue? Right? We have no insight into that. Okay, maybe there's one data point, 2 data points. Is there other? How many cobwebs are on it? Right? So we need to know how good is it, how deep is it, and how full is it. And there is a continuum here. And I don't know exact modeling here, but sure as hell I need to know what's not there and what is. Then what was nicely mentioned yesterday in one of the main talks by Olga and crew is the determinants of health. And they mention this also if you look, this is sort of the more blown up view, but the medical care and biology takes up most of our clinical bias. Most of the money is in that 35% of your health. And yet, about 70% of your outcomes are the rest of it. Right? They said zip code is the loudest signal flare for your health outcomes. And yet here we are pretty much not dealing with the social side of your health. And that's a real clinical bias and system bias. And if you want to look at this a little bit, it's another open source visualization at determinantsofhealth.org. Now, the scenarios of care. There are 60,000 ways a human fails, which in essence means that there are probably 60,000 different encounters. Right? This is a Atul Gawande line. And yet, we want to concentrate on the entire thing. The long tail is exciting sometimes because, oh, it's something brand new. We haven't found that trait has popped up, in your genome, and boom, we're going to solve it. And yet, for my money, I want to figure out and solve and standardize the Pareto part of that. What infects and hurts and afflicts most humans? And so you have to figure out, what is the primary care visit? What is the at-home visit? What is the checkup? What are all these things? And determine these signals and encounter types. So just to recap a little bit, because there are other parts here, like the intervention engine, which is a always evolving sort of care plan for you based on my everyday activities. And then the services design and a digital service on top of that. But first thing is you have to standardize the data, the elements themselves. Make sure we're all on a level playing field. Then there's the measurement. How well do you know you're doing with that? What's the measurement of that, right? There are a ton of CQMs and clinical quality measures, some with varying amounts of goodness, but that needs to be standardized. Then those algorithms, the CDS, the clinical decision support services, right, that are working, the ADAs, the buoys, all these kind of services can then start to wrap and evolve based on that. And then all of a sudden you start to standardize the gateway drug to healthcare, which is primary care. That is the open front door for all of our care for the most part. So Primary Care Manifesto by Harry Sleeper. The first thing here is you want to help the patient own, control, and understand their entire standard health record, because this helps the patient own their health. I want to understand my health status and the needed behavior changes, because this is allowing me and the patient and the care team to manage my health. Then I need to do it any way I want. Phone, satellite phone, toilet, whatever it is. Go to the ER because I want to make health easier. And then the primary care physician can then accurately diagnose with me and with my bots that I use on my phone and have a consensus on my care plan. And then the hope here is that we standardize for the US. God damn it, we want to standardize for the planet. I want to go anywhere in the world. And this should work. Because ultimately, we have been outsourcing our health for the past 100 years to the Dr. God model. We dress up for our encounters. What the, I dressed up for this. I mean, I was a t-shirt and shorts. Okay, but I am talking to more than one person. But this model is FUBARD, Tango and Cash Line. We are the most underutilized resource in healthcare. This is an Emmy line from about a half dozen years ago, which I think still resonates, that we forget. Because ultimately, this is about what happens at home, outside of the doctor's office. That is less than 1% of your total time in the healthcare system is with a professional doctor or nurse. So as much as, this is a great image, thank you, Sarah, for making this, but that's not the way, that's the way they want to sell it, at least, or that's the fear part of this, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt of it's this crazy bot that's going to not help me. But ultimately, the doctor's going to be in your pocket for most part. It's going to be a virtual doctor. And then when the times that you need something, they're going to come in for micro little help, prescription, and the adjustment. And they're going to get back to you hopefully within 1 or 2 business hours, if not quicker. 24/7. Not it's 8 o'clock p.m., yeah, I'm checked out. Because ultimately it's about virtual primary care for everybody. If you have any questions, I've stolen from all these people here. Feel free to give me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
We do have time for just a few questions, if the audience has any right now. Sold them. Oh.
I have one question. I get a little concerned about the big brother effect of having a complete health record that's out there, right? Not necessarily like for an insurance company to know that I'm overweight, so I get a higher premium. Is there any fear of having too much information available to too many people?
Sure. There's a couple of points to that. One is we don't criminalize the pejorative use of your health data now, so that should be a law. Two, we don't know who even touches, do you know who touches your health record now?
Probably many people I don't.
Right, there's this great interoperable format, there are two of them, they're called the fax and PDF, right? That proliferate everywhere, and do you know who touches that, right? Is there an audit trail even? So I think there's some even fundamental ones where we can't even handle the basics right. So you're getting to a level which is, we have some religion already, or you name your Allah of choice. And then we can, start to think about, okay, what are the legalese around that? Because we do need some protections there.
Hi, I love your message that the individual is the most underutilized resource. And I've observed in 20-year career, many people, at least the ones I run into America, don't really want accountability for their health.
Or denial.
Or they're waiting for a silver bullet or whatever. So when you look at this model, do you see any kind of shift over time with demographics or human behavior or motivation that would engage more people? Like, is it a generational thing or a tech adoption thing, or what would make people take advantage of their own power for their health?
Knowing they have it. They don't
No, it's
now.
not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, we've lived in a system where we have literally taught people for generations that the way you take care of your health is wait until you're sick and then go to the doctor and they will.
Amen, sister.
So I mean, I'm just saying, I think we have to help people unlearn that. I don't think that's their, I think that there's a lot of people there isn't a natural predisposition to, oh, now I get to own it.
Right on. So education for me is like, if I had to choose one thing and two things and three things to concentrate for a species, that would be 1, 2, and 3. But there are actually two parts. I think there's what's not taught at any K-12 level right now are civics and health, right? The fact that we can't engage with government right now, I think, is a crime. That we have also taught that out of our brains, and that also dovetails into how we manage our health too. So I think there's an education that needs to start. Whether you're a Noam Chomsky or a Nader, fan. There's something systemic that has to happen over the next generation, really to make huge change. But I think this, if I can pull it out, it's too big, this thing, this will also be one other mechanism, considering that there are billions of them on the planet, right? They are super cheap. For the not this one, but there are lots of them that are super cheap. You can text, and data is near free. Mm-hmm. And the internet really is a human right. And the second you start to foundationalize that for the planet, healthcare can be a human right, because that will be it's a stretch, but I like it, because that's the mechanism for you to get into healthcare and primary care.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, our next speaker is Kate Brigham. Kate is a UX leader with over 20 years of experience in healthcare, social software, education, gaming, and consumer technologies. Kate is the Senior Director of Design at Patients Like Me, the world's largest personalized health network, which focuses on helping people find new options for treatments, connect with others with different conditions, and take actions to improve their outcomes. So welcome, Kate.
20 years thing, boy, that suddenly made me feel really old. So interestingly, I think after the last talk, I actually wish that I had renamed my talk. I think it speaks more to what I'm talking about, and I think it's a really important point, that patients are the most underutilized resource in healthcare. I would say I think that's actually quite a bit about what Patients Like Me has been trying to to sort of work with and to help patients with. So we'll kind of start with there and see how I move through. But to start off, I love this goal, this idea of raising the patient voice to the level of medical evidence. I think it assumes that the patient perspective matters, that it's unique, that it adds something that's not currently part of the dialogue around living with and managing disease, and that patients should be credible partners, that they should be equal participants in their care. It's certainly not simple to achieve. I think if anything has been true of the conversations the last couple of days, complexity has been a theme. There are lots of people and participants and organizations who play a part in this role, but I think there is this really underutilized resource in healthcare, which is the patient, and we need to figure out a way to systematically get them into the conversation, into the process. So, as was mentioned before, I work for Patients Like Me, and that goal of raising the patient voice to the level of medical evidence is something that we've been working on for the past decade and then some. I'm sort of amazed when I pause and reflect on, wow, like this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. It takes an incredibly long time to move some of the things forward that we want to do. I sat in some of the presentations this morning and got so excited about how fast some of the technology is moving. I think incorporating all of it and really taking advantage of it is a bit of a marathon though, so I think for all of us involved in it, it is certainly a process. So Patients Like Me, again, just a quick bit of context, we really focus on people with serious chronic illnesses. So we're not a general wellness platform. We're not a place to help people sort of generally improve their health and wellness. We really focus on people living with serious illnesses like ALS, MS, Parkinson's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, epilepsy, really kind of significant life-changing conditions. And PLM was founded on this belief that every patient should be able to learn from the experiences of every other patient who came before them, not just in anecdotal ways, although I think the stories are incredibly powerful, but through data. Because the patient journey, what it's like to live day to day with a chronic illness, isn't generally routinely captured for systematic sharing or continuous learning. And I think, as was mentioned earlier before, we spend very little time actually with our doctors, engaging with the healthcare system. We spend a lot more time outside of it trying to figure out how to live as well as we can, given whatever health challenges, and in particular for our population, some pretty significant health challenges that they're grappling with. And most patients don't know what to expect. They don't know how to cope. Their caregivers don't necessarily know how to cope. And so they're really kind of muddling through this very unfamiliar territory without the benefit of the insight of all of the people who've come before them and figured out things that are not just about clinical care, but how do I manage? How do I deal with the fact that my hand isn't working as well as it used to, and I can't hold a pen anymore. I can't brush my teeth. What do I do? How do I solve that problem? Those are things that get at sort of broader healthcare challenges we have, but aren't really tackled by the healthcare system. So, as I think about our population in particular, when a cure might not be your end point, learning to live well with health challenges really becomes a challenge in and of itself. But I think, to be able to share those learnings in a systematic and scalable way, so that they're not lost or discounted, so it's not just a story that perhaps you hear and pick up, requires that we figure out how to measure and share them back. So Jamie Haywood, one of our founders, had this quote in his email signature for a long time: "To measure is to know." So I think with anybody for a science background, probably for a lot of you here, anybody who's ever done data-driven product development work, this might be second nature to you. But I have interviewed dozens and dozens of patients over the years. Any of you who have had that experience have probably figured this out too, that data is not the starting point for most of us. So there's this huge disconnect that exists, and actually helping patients understand what health data is, why it's important, how they can be creators of it, how they can learn from it, how they can use it to magnify their voice and their impact, is really part of the ongoing challenge that my team has, and I think is an important kind of piece for us all to realize and remember. While all of us might talk a lot about data and think about data, to the question earlier of how do you start to engage patients in this process, if you don't even think of data as an important part of the puzzle, your ability to create it, your ability to do something with it, we have sort of a basic kind of gap that exists there. So let me say first that I am incredibly grateful to doctors. I'm grateful to have access to the healthcare system that I do, although I now found out that Dubai is apparently looking to the US as the model for what not to do. So anyway, mostly it's done pretty well by me so far, so I'm appreciative of that. I assume many of us are. But I think there's this gap that exists between what matters to us as people. So when we talk about determinants of health, I think that's another way to phrase it. But this gap between, kind of what matters to us as people and how illness, and especially serious chronic illness, can affect our lives. But sort of, we look to our healthcare providers, we look to the healthcare system to try to help us with this and get frustrated when we're saying, but this affects my whole life. Who's helping me with that piece of it? How do I deal with some of those things? So I think it creates a real opportunity that if we involve patients in the process of measuring more of the things that matter, then I think we can figure out how to incorporate more of that sort of totality of the life and the health experience kind of into the conversation. And one of the things that I've learned too and really come to believe is I think actually just the mere act of measuring some of these things, some of these more, kind of intangibles or quality of life issues, just simply makes it feel like it matters more. If someone asks you to measure something which before no one asked you about, it suddenly makes you think about it slightly differently. It gives it a level of importance, it gives it a level of kind of merit that's lacking when it's a nice to have or a nice idea. So I think just the sheer act of measuring things and involving people in the process changes the conversation. So I'm a designer and I'm a design researcher. I head up a design team, as Jonathan very nicely said in his introduction. And this is a big problem space. It's a complex shift. I think Johan did a great job of sort of framing out some of the players in this process, and I certainly want to situate our work in that context too. Making progress here requires the input of researchers and clinicians, data scientists, psychometricians, project managers, marketers. Let us not forget marketers, actually. I feel like they're really important in trying to help get the word out and help get patients involved and interested in this process. Developers, policymakers, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, sort of design is just a small slice of work in this. And one of the things that my team tries to do is really to listen closely to patients, to try to continuously bring their voice into the process and help them amplify it, but also to try to make sure that they're learning along with us. So when it comes to things like measuring what matters, Amy Cueva and I had coffee maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and she was looking at some of the member profiles on our site, and she asked me what I think actually was a really thought-provoking question. I still remember it all these years later, and she said, isn't all the focus on like what's wrong, all the red, just really discouraging and depressing for people? And you know what it is? Living with a chronic illness can suck. There's a lot of bad that goes along with that. Living with a progressive disease, even more so. So I think, as I've interviewed people and talked to patients over the years, I realize there's this incredible shift that people go through where they have to really readjust their thinking and their perspective and start to accommodate a new normal, a new future. It's often one they didn't want. It's usually one they didn't expect, and it's a pretty significant change. So, in addition to looking at measurement as a really important way to try to quantify some of these things that matter, I think it's also important to think about, is there a way to kind of reframe it or to tackle it from some sort of a slightly different perspective, not to downplay what people are dealing with, because it's really important actually to let them share authentically what the challenges are, but to try to help them find and focus on some kind of new normal, reframe expectations in a way that maybe allows for some new kinds of good, despite some of the changes that go along with some of these really significant diagnoses. So maybe 4 years ago or so, we started routinely doing ethnographic interviews with patients. And one of the things that came out of that work are these measurement principles. And I think what they gave us was some guideposts to use in thinking about how to kind of flip the frame on measurement to some extent, especially when you're involving patients in the process of trying to get them to measure their own health. And to really start to think of measurement as a tool to empower patients, to help them amplify their voice, to help them learn something through the process without hopefully making them feel worse in the process, without so much of the focus on all the red. So since then, a group of people at Patients Like Me have been working to redefine our approach to measuring health, and at its core is this concept of adding a new domain into the mix, this concept of thriving. And so when we went out and we talked to patients, one of the things that really came out, some kind of universal themes in those conversations, is that people really think of health as how their body and their mind are doing, and it's strongly influenced by the presence of whether or not they are living with diseases. There are some people who felt like they could only ever be healthy kind of in some ways because they're limited by whatever their condition is that they're living with. Thriving, on the other hand, is about living the life that you want. It's about a life with purpose and autonomy and meaning. And so I think health challenges make this harder, but we've certainly seen, I have certainly heard from people who found ways to adapt and to kind of find that new normal and to find ways to thrive. So I think thriving actually creates a really interesting frame in which to measure the things that are not broken, a way to quantify things that have not been lost, but hopefully gained or maybe discovered anew through the process of the journey that they've been going through. So some of the reframing can be as simple as changing wording. If you look at a lot of the patient-reported outcomes that are used, they often ask you questions like, how often did you feel worthless? Just being asked how often I feel worthless makes me feel a little more worthless. So what if instead you said, how often did you feel good about yourself? What if instead of saying, how bad was your insomnia? Granted, you're going to have to do that for some things like pain, but what if instead it was, how well could you sleep? So some of the new things that we're looking to measure in this new domain of thriving are things like, how often did you feel connected to other people? Oftentimes when people are ill, if they get older, they feel very isolated, they feel very alone. So this idea of kind of still feeling connected. I love all these technologies of, asking people questions in text, because even that small thing just sort of helps to make people feel less alone. How often did you feel in charge of your own health? How often did you feel effective? How often did you feel good about yourself? And so far, I think, the response we've gotten from members who we've started testing some of these new measures out with have been extremely positive. Again, I think it's that when you measure some of these things, you help remind people of them. You elevate their importance in a way that I think is important. But I think if our goal as an organization is to raise the patient voice to the level of medical evidence, if any of us want to do that, it's not enough. The data has to be credible. Very much to the point that Johan was speaking about before. If it doesn't fit into and inform the system we have, or if we don't create a system looking forward that actually changes what that data looks like, then this kind of focus, this new measurement, just really becomes window dressing. So learnings need to be shared in ways that are usable and credible. So things like publications in peer-reviewed journals become very important. They're important to establish credibility. So we've got a whole bunch of people who publish like crazy. Other people also need to be able to use the data. I think they need to see how it maps to existing measures and data sets. They need to be able to crosswalk it with data that they know and are familiar with. They need to see it and play with it and mess around with it and figure out, is there something to be learned from it? So I think partnerships across biotech and pharma and academia and payers, insurers, all of these other groups become really important, because if we can't do that, if we can't make sure others are using the data and working with it, then we can't ensure that it's useful and that it's usable and that it's going to be relevant. The data also needs to be structured in ways that make it comparable and make it able to be validated. I think that's a question that often comes up for us. And we've done an interesting partnership with the FDA, and what was fascinating about that partnership is they basically looked at how we were coding our patient-reported data. They compared it to how they're coding the data that they use for patient safety, and we had something like a 95% correlation. And so that gave them the sense that, this patient-reported data actually has some validity. Maybe we could start to think about how to use that as we think about patient safety reporting. So I think that ability to really plug into the systems that people know other organizations are using is key. But I think another thing that's really important for us to remember is really audiences. What makes the data relevant and useful for clinical or sort of research or industry audiences doesn't always answer patient questions. Again, if you think about all of the 99% of the time you spend outside of the healthcare system trying to grapple with some of these very basic questions like, how do I brush my teeth now that my hand doesn't work anymore? You need you need to know what the questions are that patients have. And I think when it comes to participating in research especially, a big part of what we do is sort of engage people in research, is that, the promise of change in the future isn't always enough to motivate or engage people. And so, we've got to, often that can be, I think, a bit too removed. So, filling out questionnaires is a bit of a slog. I want to live in the world where I don't have to enter a single piece of data. So I think one of the things I've been thinking about more in the last couple days is, what are things only a person can tell you about their quality of life, about, their relationships with people, about things that matter, versus what are the things that we can have our smart toilets and our mirror kind of tell us instead. I think we certainly want to get to a place where there's less that we have to report, but I think it's important also to sort of figure out what is that piece that only the patients can tell us. So my statistic was a little bit different than sort of the one that we saw in the first presentation, but I think regardless, sort of the intent is the same. People are willing to share, the interest is there, but I think a big part of our job is actually to help people understand the opportunity, the so what. I think education is actually key, and when I talked about marketers being important, I think this is actually one of the things that they're good at doing, is kind of getting the word out, because data isn't a starting point for everyone. Just like many of us needed to know how to make our voices heard after the election, that you should pick up the phone instead of send an email or sign a petition, people need to understand how to plug into this process. It is not self-evident to them. And again, back to this idea that they have their own set of questions, we need to figure out ways to make sure what gets measured actually answers those questions along the way. And certainly it's, how do I treat this burn, and some very key questions like that. But I think there are bigger, broader questions too that patients have, that we want to be able to create a repository of shared wisdom and experiences across, all of the people who've been there before you, that you can tap into and start to learn from. So I think one of the things that we found that's key, that's a great kind of resource and design principle for us, is to think about the fact that no matter what condition patients have, we've talked to people with dozens of different illnesses, they actually often tend to have a lot of the same questions. What is this thing I have? A condition that we have a community for on our site is called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. Who here has heard of it? So most people who get diagnosed with this have never heard of it. They go in and they're a little short of breath and they're coughing and they're told, you have something that could kill you in 3 to 5 years. And they're like, I've never even heard of it. So there's a lot of just understanding what this thing is. And I think people want to know what it's going to do to me. Some sense of, can you help me understand what my future might look like? I had a conversation with a gentleman a couple of weeks ago who said, I figure maybe I only have about 5 years left to live. Well, right now I spend 3 days a week mowing my lawn every summer. I'm not sure that's how I want to spend the rest of my time. I'm going to rethink it. But if somebody can't help him understand without feeling immediately hopeless that, forget it, you're going to die in 3 years, I think people can start to make decisions in different sort of ways, feel empowered in ways that I think are important. I think another thing that people don't know is this thing I'm experiencing normal? Your doctor might tell you, you might experience one of these various side effects. And then maybe you do, but you don't know if that's too severe, not severe enough to call your doctor, is this really bad? And so I think there's just kind of a lack of understanding about a lot of those things. So monitoring along the way is fantastic and helpful, but also just, is this normal? I think what might help me get better is a thing that we all look to our medical system and our doctors often to help us with, but I think what might help me live with it is really a thing that patients are sort of perfectly poised to really help each other learn and understand in ways that I think are incredibly important. And then, back to this idea of sort of this whole life view, not just treating ourselves in sickness, but thinking about how to live well in the context of health challenges, is how do I handle some of the problems that being sick, are causing for me? Am I, is this going to change my relationship with my spouse, my ability to be a good parent? Is this going to affect my ability to work? Am I going to have to change jobs? Am I going to have cognitive issues that I'm not aware of, physical issues that I need to take into consideration? Am I going to go bankrupt? Good God, please somebody figure out a way to make that not happen, because boy, that makes me cry every time I hear a patient's story about that. But I think, when it comes to trying to get people engaged in trying to measure their health and share some of this information, people want to know that what they're sharing and doing is having a tangible impact. They want to be able to see that they're actually helping other people learn from it. I think that's an incredibly important motivator. You have expertise and insight, you've shared it, other people have learned from it and found value in it. I think that's incredibly important in changing people's perspective. I think also to be able to do that on multiple levels, to be able to help your neighbor or your friend who's got a condition that you have, but also to know that you're having an impact in bigger and broader ways. I think knowing that your contributions are helping to drive change is important. I think, again, not just helping patients sort of flip their perspective, start to think about measurement in different ways, but also really recognizing and celebrating and elevating the expertise of the patient, because they know so much about their conditions. It is amazing if you talk to 10 people with lupus, what you will learn about lupus that's different from what you learn when you talk to doctors. So I think giving them forums and formats for being able to really share that expertise, because we can't measure what matters if we don't listen, if we don't respect patients as credible partners. So we have this practice that we call give something, get something. And the idea is that if you take the time to participate, to share your experience and expertise, then you should learn something in return. You're not just an N or a guinea pig, but you're a valued partner, and you're entitled to learn from what you're sharing and what other people are sharing, because patients have a lot of skin in this game. They should be a key part of the audience for the learnings and conclusions. It seems like such a missed opportunity if a third of people who take part in clinical trials walk away not having learned anything from that experience. We got to make sure that the people who are part of the process are learning as well. So I'm going to shorten this part a little bit, but I think altruism is a thing that's talked about quite a lot as a motivator for people, and I'd actually ask you to think about that in a different way. One of the things that I realized after talking to a lot of patients at some point, especially for people with chronic illnesses who might have to stop working, who might have to really kind of reduce and shrink their life down because they're no longer able to work outside of the house. They've had to go on disability. You suddenly stop feeling as important in the world. That sense of purpose and that sense of being able to contribute sort of gets sucked away from you. And I think there's an opportunity to say, you know what, you are expert as a human being living with this condition, and we need your expertise. We need what you've learned. We need to be able to take advantage of that and help you create new meaning and find new opportunity through that. So I think this ability to really help people make their experience count and be seen as experts is a really important sort of add-on. It's not just about altruism. It's actually doing something in return for the people, because you make them understand that they are in fact still important and relevant. And then I will end here. So I think, not only do patients want to make a difference, I think probably all of us who are working in this space do. It's a pretty lofty goal to try to make something better that I think all of us care about. And for me, it got really personal this spring. My father was diagnosed with ALS. It seems kind of ironic that I work for a company founded on ALS. It's a pretty rare condition. But I think all of us have a personal connection to this in some sort of way. We've experienced something that didn't work, and we want to try to make it better. When I've talked to my dad, as he goes through this, I realize there's a lot he needs to know. There's a lot he needs to learn from the others who came before him. And he wants to make sure that he has some opportunity to make what is absolutely going to be a difficult journey for him, for my mom, for our family, to lead to something good. To have some sort of positive impact and not just be kind of a horrible end to look forward to, because that will sustain him. That sense that he has something to contribute is very important as far as sort of his own ability to have hope. So I think that's the opportunity that we all have, to flip the frame, to help people share what they know, live better, learn from each other, make a difference, and hopefully thrive. So thank you.
Any questions for Kate? Nope. Thank you. So our last speaker is Payal Patel. Payal is a people researcher with over 10 years experience in a broad range of topics related to to health and the overall continuum of care. These include things like aging and chronic disease management, point of care testing, mobile ultrasound, and clinical decision support. Pale works at Philips as a researcher in the research and innovation space, supporting scientists in defining value propositions and what the future technologies could potentially be. So welcome, Payel.
So thank you, everyone. I'm the last presentation. I think people are losing their energy, so hopefully you guys can focus. And this is on a timer. So yeah, you know, I recently watched a documentary on Warren Buffett, and he likes to spend a lot of time alone tinkering on problems. And he says, you know, problems about money, problems about business are easy to solve, but problems with humans are much, much harder. There is no straight answer. There is no one answer that fits everybody. And that's the space I get to work in. And you know, what Warren Buffett needs is me. I spend a lot of my time solving human problems. So on a typical day, a scientist will come to me and say, I have this great algorithm that is, you know, amazing. It will solve everybody's problem. And it uses deep learning and machine learning. And we're also going to use VR. And then I ask him, yeah, but how are people going to use it? And why does somebody want it? And how does it impact their life? They can't answer that question. So that's where I come in. I help them define the solution and really, how does it really make someone's life better? So often when we talk about patients, we focus on the patient, and rightfully so. But today I'm here to talk about the other people that are involved. So when you have a sick person in your family, if anybody's had a person who's sick, unfortunately, it influences a larger scope of people, all the caregivers who are part of their lives. And so it's not just about the patient's experience, it's also about the caregiver's experience. And even companies like Philips don't address this group, and yet they are a big cohort of information, of knowledge, that can really influence the outcome and the experience that the patient has. So when we think of family, we hope that it's about love and about, you know, having a good time, yet caregiving is not about that. It's actually about bills. It's actually about time spent away from your nuclear family. It's about organizing knowledge that you don't even understand yourself, and it's really difficult to navigate the healthcare system. It's oftentimes it's less than about love, and we want to bring it back to that. And how can we support caregivers reduce their burden, reduce the anxiety that it causes, and provide them with a better way to engage with their senior in a more meaningful way, and get back to that love part of it. So this is actually a picture of devices that are for the home healthcare for Philips. You can see in the background it's not organized. It's a mess. We really don't understand how to improve people's lives at home. We understand the healthcare experience in the hospital, but we really don't understand what it takes to improve the healthcare at home and to empower patients and families to be more part of their healthcare. When we talk about patient experience, quickly, even at Philips, the KPIs become, how do you reduce length of stay, reduce cost, improve outcomes. None of this makes any sense to a patient or their family. Of course they want reduced cost, but that's not the language that they speak. So what I'd like to present to you today is, if we had to solve a problem like this, how does a team at Philips come up with the answers that are more meaningful and resonate better with patients themselves and their caregivers? So oddly enough, when we started this project, it was called Family Experience 2020, which is very soon again, so totally not relevant. But we start off by casting the net wide. We did ethnographic research in 3 countries, and we spent over 100 hours with patients and their families, interviewing them, understanding their context, understanding their different cultural experiences. So we had families in Singapore, in England, and the Boston area. And what we were really trying to grapple is, forget the actual disease state, but how do you live? What's important to you in your day-to-day life? And the health part of it just comes as a second layer on top of it. So we interviewed chronic disease patients and their caregivers, and then we also shadowed them for an extended period of time. Along with that, we had generative sessions with clinicians to understand, okay, we've highlighted pain points. from the family and the caregivers, but what does that mean for you? How do you hear these things in your day-to-day life and your experiences? Does it resonate with you as a clinician? And so we took these two sides, and what we like to think of is we stop thinking about patients as themselves, but think of familias as a group of people that we're taking care of. So when you're taking care of a person with a congestive heart failure, you're also taking care of their wife who's supporting them. You're also taking care of their son and daughter who have to visit them and completely change their life. And so we try to build these complex views of patients. And this is not just to be truthful for the patient, but to also resonate this message to engineers and to business leaders within Philips to make sure that we think of the holistic experience. We also generated over 100 plus what we like to call issue cards. This is to make sure that when we are generating concepts in this space and ideas in this space, that we're not just talking at the high level, we're also going to the deeper level and making sure that when we're designing solutions, we're tackling something that means something to a real person. And believe it or not, even though Philips is in the space of healthcare, not everybody can answer the question of what does a day in a life of a patient really look like? And an added layer, how does that influence the day in a life of a caregiver? So when we did this map, what turned out to be was the morning session is so heavy for the patient and the caregiver. It is ridiculous amount of activities they have to do, the medication they have to think about, all the measurements they have to take, and the joy of life is completely taken out, and we're part of that. So how can we improve that? Because we design solutions on that. The second layer of understanding is also understanding the context, so the economic factors that are influencing the decision-making of the patient, the government policies that are impacting each of these countries and societies. And also, what are some of the social structures that are affecting what they're doing? So we create these personas not only of the patient and the family and their experience, but also of the countries that we're going to engage in. So out of this exercise, we came up with experience drivers. I'm going to only name one because I'm focusing on that one. And the idea is to get away from talking about cost and length of stay, and to get away from talking about all these things, all these values that mean absolutely nothing to a patient and their family. And one of the key performance indicators that came out that mean something to patients is tailored patient and family empowerment. And I think every presentation today talked about this, so this is nothing new. But how can we address this? So I want to show you an example of something, of a project that we're trying to work on right now that's addressing this. It's called Care Partners. It's a mobile application that allows caregivers to work together in a team to provide care. So through this research, we identified that caregivers actually work in a team. There are more than one people that are involved in the care, and the hardest part is coordinating that care. If you've ever tried to work in, family dynamics are so complicated, and so what ends up happening is there's a primary caregiver that does all the work, and the rest of the family caregivers are there once in a while. How can we reduce the burden of that primary caregiver by making information more visible and empower them to be part of their care and focus less on the day-to-day hassle of caregiving and focus back on that love that I was talking about? So the design of the Care Partners was based on 45 caregiver interviews, 17 care participants, once again making it real, basing our thoughts on contextual information. And the pain point is that 40% of caregivers are overburdened. The annual cost of unpaired caregiving is $522 billion. So this is not the paid caregivers. This is not clinicians. This is not home health aides. These are loved ones who are taking care of their seniors. They're unaddressed. And yet they could provide us with so much information and be really a key part of the well-being and the better outcome of the senior. And 55% of them provide care in a team, which means that there is more than one person, and it complicates any solution when you have more than one user. So when we think about patient, it's easier to solve something for one patient, but when you try to solve it for more than one person, that's where the complexity lies. So what the biggest pain point is, there's a bunch of personalities that come in. How do you balance out the opinions of one person with another person's opinion? So where I might think mom is doing great, then my sister might think mom is doing really much worse, and this is based on her perspective. How can we align this opinion and provide the care that the patient needs. And also, families often spread out. So there might be a caregiver who lives in the same city as a senior, and then another caregiver who lives in the next town. And yet they have to work together as a team to provide this care. And this tool is aiming to provide a central location for all of this to happen. So most caregivers provide, 99% of what they do is provide help with daily activities such as grocery shopping, transportation, food, household work. And so one way to reduce the burden of caregiving is to help them organize this stuff better so they have to think about it less. So this is not what they want to focus on in life, and how can we reduce the worry they have to do about it by organizing all these activities. So through this research, we found some insights about drivers of the experience and what is important to them in caregiving. One of them was, how can you help me reinforce my partnership that I have with the caregiver, care receiver? The senior never wants to feel like you're doing something to them. It has to be done with them. And so we want to design a tool that is in reinforcing this sort of circle of care. Also, calibrating needs. Oftentimes, there is not a consistency between what the senior wants and what the caregiver wants to provide them with care. And so we want to provide a tool where they can calibrate the needs of one and the other and be able to make that visible. Provide companionship for the distance. A large part of caregiving burden is that you have to be there and present with your senior. And many of these people are the sandwich generation. They have teenagers who are in high school or going into college, and they also have seniors they're taking care of at home. And so how can they manage their time and balance the needs of both their nuclear family as well as extended family? Of course, motivating their senior to be more in tune with their care. And then the worst part of caregiving is the emergencies that happen. So you can imagine caregiving where there is a standard, time of stability where things are going well, and then there is an emergency that changes everything suddenly. Mother falls down. She's much sicker than she was before. I have to quit my job because I have to take care of her full time now. I have to move closer to her, and I have to be away from my husband for this time. These kinds of emergencies, if they could avoid them, would be very beneficial if they can keep track of that. And the data that's provided by doctors and the healthcare information we have doesn't allow you to predict or take action in emergencies right now. And then aggregating information on complex topics that they're researching. So in a way, the caregiver has to know much more about the care, not only the patient, but also about their healthcare condition than the doctor does. Because they are the sole person that might usually be following them around and being the second set of eyes in a doctor's appointment. And so it's a complex field. If you're not a clinician, if you're not a doctor, and you don't know the healthcare field, understanding and digesting this information is quite complicated. And the last set of insights are, how do I chronicle the progression of a disease so I can sort of predict the future so I'm not taken up by surprise? And how can I be there for my loved one? Tracking medications. So a GP is supposed to be the one tracking medications, and yet the truth of it is they don't. It is this caregiver who is tracking the medications that the senior is taking. And many of the complications and emergencies are caused by not knowing what medications are being taken. So this is another need that they had. And the last one is planning for the future so I can plan, be more informed. Do I need to put my mom in a home? Should I move her in to live with me? There are a plethora of choices, and in a family relationship, nothing seems like the right answer. So these are the solutions that they're looking for, guidance they're looking for in the application. So a little view into what we're trying to do. So there are many things that the app does, but one of the things that we've recognized is important is the qualitative information that the caregiver collects about their senior. So more than the clinicians, more than the doctor that sees them quarterly, is a caregiver who sees them day to day. And they are tracking the progression of the patient and how they're feeling, and they have all this information that we can really take advantage of. And how can we collect this and give some prediction on how the patient's doing? So Philips as a company, it owns a lot of quantitative data about the patient, and yet it doesn't tell you it doesn't give you the holistic view of what the patient's feeling. It can't answer if the patient's happy. But I think a caregiver can. And so this is an exploratory topic for us, but we're investigating how can we take qualitative observations made by caregivers and make it more useful in answering the needs of the patient and the caregiving family. That's it.
Any questions? Okay, if I can have all the panelists sit at your death seats. Just be careful. These chairs are terribly unstable. We're gonna change things up a little bit here. Anybody here a Conan O'Brien fan?
Yeah.
So instead of just having an open discussion, we're going to actually do things a little bit differently. If you are a fan of Conan O'Brien from... This one's yours, actually.
Keep going.
I have my own. Circa 2000, or just before 2000, and then ironically after 2000, Conan did a sketch series about trying to predict what on earth the future would be. Is a little bit more entertaining in the sense that most of it was about extremes of society, but we're going to do a little bit of the same here. I'm going to flash topics, and I would introduce the audience to help out as we do this as well. And we'll try to figure out what, we'll try to actually predict the future. What on earth will be happening? We have lots of different perspectives in terms of what we think will happen, but let's have a conversation around that. So, first topic is telemedicine. In the year 2000, what is, I've been practicing all weekend. 2020 or beyond, where will telemedicine be? I heard that. Somebody made fun of it. Go. Anybody?
All right, I'm apparently supposed to start.
No
Well,
order.
it's funny. I actually did an internship at Mass General when I was in college, which now that we know I've been working for 20 years plus means I'm like 100 years old. But teleradiology was a thing. So I feel like this has sort of been coming for years and years, and I think we've actually seen a lot of different people sharing ideas around telemedicine now. So my sense is it's coming. I think people will find it fantastic if you think about it from a patient standpoint, since I'll share that's one I have a lot of perspective on. We interviewed a bunch of lupus patients. Their doctors are telling them, you should call us whenever your symptoms get worse. And they're not doing that, partly because they're not sure what worse symptoms looks like, smells like, feels like, but also it's a pain to call your doctor's office. So I think the ability to just reduce the friction and actually make it that much easier is something that certainly will make it at least a little bit more likely that patients will feel like they can reach out to their doctors, they can have more of those conversations in between visits and kind of reduce the burden.
So telemedicine right now kind of exists. You can take your measurements at home, send it to your doctor if you have a chronic disease, and they can look at the parameters and say if you're doing bad or not. I think the future is maybe more such that you can take a better look at yourself. So I see ultrasound going into the home, and you being able to take some images yourself, and that being a way where you are more engaged in the information. It's more real to you. Right now, the information is hidden away. You don't get to see your own the insides. I think patients will be able to take more diagnostic stuff themselves and actually interpret the measurements themselves as well, not just take a measurement, hope somebody gives you the answer, after a few hours.
I'll go next. So I think telemedicine will probably be improving, maybe not at a really fast pace or steady pace, but most likely kind of slowly. And the two reasons for that are reimbursement, ensuring that reimbursement is appropriate, and then also designing for these patients who are going to be using it, right? For example, aging third world patients, millennials are going to take it on for sure, but we got a way to get there.
I think it's going to go fast. Okay. So there are 2.2 billion encounters that United Statesians have every year, right? Is that 2.2? And apparently 70% of those can be done remotely. So I think there is an obvious financial one, but an obvious one where I can be in my underpants, maybe TMI, at home at 11 o'clock at night going, here's my problem. And I can have part of, like, you can't do all the the things that some primary care physicians and nurses do, like do the whole exercise, you know, where you move your arms, but how many people have done that in the past 10 years, right? Probably zero, like a full checkup. But that kind of care is rapidly coming. I mean, I've used Doctors on Demand a few times, you know, not one of the best services. Talk about a data problem. But Sherpa is another one by Jay Parkinson down in Brooklyn. And that's, you know, I've been using that for about 9 months. Pretty damn good. It gets back to me in reasonable time. I haven't had any mission critical errors or needs with it yet, but you know, I think that's, you see the uptick.
What about missing warning signs, though? Like, I use even Amy Cueva's mother example. It took multiple actual in-doctor visits before a chiropractor even discovered warning signs of potential brain cancer. If we're shifting to even more remote connections to physicians, is that a huge risk? Will that trend of missed warning signs increase because of that?
I mean, I would say it comes down to segmentation as well, right? So maybe telemedicine will be good for some population and not for others, right? So for more critical patients, you might want to do something else, or there's this physical relationship with your doctor. I mean, the one-to-one relationship that you need for more critical cases.
Well, what's happening with radiology is one example, right, in oncology, where scans are being done, you know, for 12 hours here, you know, at MGH, and then the other 12 hours of the day they go to Australia, right? So, you know, that's happening. Also, the machine is doing a lot of the processing beforehand, and like 2 or 3 passes, then the human's in the loop. So, the writing's on the wall, right? It's the same thing we did to travel agents with orbits. Take that with a huge grain of salt.
In the year 2000, patient privacy. I won't do that for every one of these. Okay.
Do you want to expand on that?
Patient privacy. It's over. I knew he was going to say that. I was waiting for him to just drop that mic. Yep. It's dead. Okay. All right. Is that it?
Well, so this was a topic that came up yesterday at the session that I was at in the morning, and I think people were asking in response to, are people actually comfortable sharing their medical data? You know, what are some of the barriers to that? And there are a handful of things that I've certainly seen in talking to patients that I think people have real fear and anxiety around. One is they're afraid that they're going to lose their health insurance because they're fucked if they do. The second is they're afraid they're going to lose their job, because that's not an outcome you want either. And a third thing people are really anxious about is being kind of found out in their communities, being tagged as somebody who has something, especially if it's a mental illness or something that has stigma associated with it. So I think as long as people have fear and anxiety that sharing information about themselves can lead to any of those 3 outcomes, I think we're going to have challenges. So to me, it feels like we have to solve those problems in advance of sort of making it more comfortable, more reasonable for people to share that information. So someone put a hand up.
So are the patients on Patients Like Me anonymous?
They are. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, as anonymous as anything is on the internet. So one of the things we tell, you know, we ask people explicitly not to share their full names because it is a way to identify them. You can put together a handful of pieces of information and identify people. Some people choose to share more than others, and you know, it's the internet. You can find things out. I think even that measure of feeling like they're holding a bit of their identities back is really important to some people, though, because it gives them, I think, a measure of feeling comfortable talking about things they otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable talking about. In the session this morning, someone talked about the fact that if you're talking to a machine as opposed to a person, you'll say things differently than you would say otherwise. I think if you feel like you don't have to share your identity, people will be more comfortable talking about things they otherwise wouldn't talk about. They'll also behave badly. So, you know, there are pros and cons.
Should we just as a side note, we don't ask much of people as citizens. Very little, right? Some people pay taxes. Most don't do jury, right? We find ways out of it. So talk about very little.
And to vote is a voting.
No, it's not required. This is not Australia. It should be, but that's a whole separate conversation. What if, this is, now the privacy watch will be, hairs in the back of the neck will go up, as part of your W-2 every year, you had to fill out and have, here are your 5 health metrics that the population probably needed to know. Yeah, I hear, whoa! But there's something as a citizen of this community, of this state, of this nation, that we have somehow undermined and said, no, you don't have to participate. I don't know, there may be something bigger that we should be doing as a society to say, hey, let's really make sure that we're getting our health, our education, in line.
But I think if we want to ask about that, we also have to make people feel like we're going to help them do something about those five things potentially that we ask them to share. So don't ask me for it if you're going to then make sure I don't get insurance or end up in the poorhouse. If ask, then you owe me something in return.
Yeah, just say one more thing about privacy. If there's a breach, like we all use Facebook, right? And then sometimes we don't even realize where our data are going and what's happening to them. If we have a breach or two in terms of patient privacy, security breaches have been happening. There will be lower trust for patients to actually share their data. So that's something to watch out for. So then I would like to, really understand what is the scenario if that happens, and it will be interesting to see.
Yeah. I worry about patient privacy more about in the acute care setting. I think just saying, yeah, I have these diseases, that's fine. But if there's a data breach with monitoring data, I worry about that. The change of that could influence the outcome of a patient. So I think that patient-reported stuff might be easier to manage, but the other stuff is a little bit more challenging.
I mean, it is a good point. Data breaches in the financial sector have completely undermined any trust with all organizations, even those who have not been involved. Even those not even associated, even just like things like the Home Depot breach, over 250 million credit cards, was directly associated with financial. So then the reputation just suffered in that sense. So that is a big topic. Let's move on to cost transparency. Speaking of financial.
So I was in a roundtable yesterday about cost transparency, and somebody actually crossed over pricing and wrote down value. So it's very complicated, right? It's not just about the cost of your treatment or whatever it is. It needs to be tailored to the patient themselves, and it needs to be compiling a lot of additional data, not just the price.
So pregnancy in the United States, out of pocket for patients, is roughly $10,000. In the Netherlands, in Switzerland, in South Africa, it's quarter this price. It's only $2,000. Healthcare companies like Philips, other companies are incentivized to itemize the care they provide, and so the costs are never going to go down right now because of that. So I think it's a bigger problem than we can solve right now. I think we have to rethink, how companies are incentivized.
I do think there's an interesting opportunity, though, in just actually helping people understand how much things cost. I had an experience myself where a couple years ago I decided to go for the high deductible plan. Everybody talked about, oh, the high deductible plan, it's great. You save all this money. God, was it a pain in the ass from a paperwork standpoint. But I had one instance where I had a cough that wouldn't go away. I went into my doctor. They said, you maybe have pneumonia, probably not. It'll probably go away. We'll send you for a chest x-ray just to confirm. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Like, I'm still in the high deductible part of my plan. How much is that going to cost? It was a lot. And I sort of said, okay, so what will this help you learn? And they said, well, it'll probably just confirm what we already suspect. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to have to shell out, I don't even remember what it was, but it was several hundreds of dollars for nothing, really, for nothing particularly helpful. And that made me rethink a decision that I otherwise might not have thought twice about. So I feel like, when I think about privacy and sharing, when I think about cost transparency, I think just generally making this knowledge more accessible, available, part of the conversation, something that's sort of typically part of our interactions and our engagements with the healthcare system, just raises the level of awareness. And simply raising the level of awareness, I think, starts us on that journey towards actually making changes. Because if people don't know about it, they're not going to care about it.
So I have a slight counter to that in that I come from a background in other industries as well, including retail, and so it's very easy for me to start to see patterns that are starting to evolve. So as you start to empower patients to be consumers, to be customers, and make choices based off of financial and cost, that also empowers those that are selling those services to communicate in ways that are more of a sales structured perspective, right? And if you look out there, even now, in certain parts of the industry, MRIs and scans being one of them, you're starting to see that. You'll see, like, choose us because we're slightly cheaper and we have high quality MRIs. Like in Massachusetts, we are inundated by Teddy Bruschi in his quality MRI commercials. They're everywhere. And that is an effect of empowering choice based off of cost. But what it does not translate is, is that MRI a tier 3 high resolution machine or a tier 2 medium resolution machine? And do you, as a patient, even know what the hell does that mean? And so, if you are going to have a scan that's going to perhaps find or not find an important gliosis or something, like, you want to know that you've made a choice not just by cost, but by the efficiency of that machine or its capabilities.
Or the radiologist reading it, yeah.
Exactly. So cost is only one part of that, but all that's being introduced is cost without an apples-to-apples comparison. Whereas if I'm buying a car, I can look at horsepower versus horsepower or towing capacity versus towing capacity, whereas I am never empowered as a consumer to figure out one MRI capability versus another and make the proper choice in that sense. And no one is out there saying, no, don't choose them because I can't read that correctly. They let that happen no matter what. So that's what scares me is when that starts to evolve, not just within Teddy Bruschi's world of sports injuries, but into other aspects of healthcare as well. You held your mic up. So
yeah, I was just going to say I agree with that. I mean, that's why, value versus price, it's not just a number. It's actually a number of different pieces of information that you need to put together. And it's more complicated than just somebody shopping on Amazon and comparing the prices for two different things, right?
In the year 2000.
No, I was just going to add, I completely agree on the front end and the worries that you're sharing. On the back end, just kind of anecdotally, our revenue cycle management team observed that when people called for certain procedures and scheduled them, they were starting to share some cost transparency in preparation for this. And what they observed is that people paid their bills faster if they were informed ahead of time. And so I think it's just interesting if we allow people some, option and choice in this and give them something to expect. We do give some control back, and I think that's really important. So.
Yeah, and something we were talking about yesterday actually was getting to know before the procedure rather than getting your bill when there's nothing else you can do.
And I mean, every time I buy something on Amazon, I always look at the rating. So it's like, okay, that's some number of dollars cheaper, but it got 2 stars, and this one got 5 stars. So I think, even if it doesn't always happen in lockstep, I think that question about quality is one that's at the top of everybody's head. I want it cheap, I want it fast, and I want it to be great. And so, people will, I think, demand that kind of information, even if it's not readily available immediately. I certainly think it will come.
I would have made the same decision you made in that scenario and had a similar situation, but I don't think that's a sign of a good system, though, either. We're not experts on whether that's a good value decision. Like, what if that cough was something that would have been life-threatening? The system's broken in that regard, in my opinion. Because, like, if I'm buying something on Amazon, I can make a good decision of whether I need this consumer packaged good or not, but I can't decide for my health. I'm not a doctor.
Well, actually, so I love that conversation, but it's also like risk aversion, right? You're somewhat risk averse, she's willing to take it on, and I think actually that is a decision that should belong with me as a consumer of health. Like, I want that control of my life.
Maybe an informed one where it says this is the percentage chance of this is.
But, it also felt to me like she was saying, if your cough doesn't go away in a week, then we want you to come back. And so it was sort of okay, I have the choice to either just go and get this thing now and shell out a bunch of money for it, or at least know what might actually clue me into this is a thing that I should consider, this is a thing I should get. And so the more I know, the more I'm able to be kind of an activated, engaged, somewhat educated participant. And Lord knows I'm not a doctor. There's more I don't know than I do know. But at least it feels like I'm sort of being thoughtful about the process in a way, as opposed to just kind of, well, this is what they told me to do, so I guess I'll, sort of head off and do that. If we don't figure out how to learn more about this, I don't know how any of us get better at it.
The other end of it is providing ways to get to the answer in a cheaper way. So X-rays and MRIs cost a lot of money because of the device cost, where it's provided, the sonographer cost. But if we had a lower tech device where your doctor could have done it herself and answered the question herself, I mean, that would have improved your experience of it, and it would have been cheaper. So maybe there's innovations in the way we, get that the diagnosis that could reduce the cost.
precision therapies in the year 2000?
Yes, please. My understanding of precision therapies is that it's not for the average patient. Most patients are cookie cutter. It's for those unique patients who have certain condition. They're not reacting well to a treatment or as expected, and so the clinician doesn't quite know how to proceed forward. So in the future, it's more identifying these unique patients and comparing them to a larger cohort.
For $500, I can get a swab and send it into a company that'll give me my predisposition for diseases. But what I don't have is
I don't know how accurate those are, though.
That's the thing. Like,
yeah.
So the jury's out.
Do I
Yeah.
trust that? Do I not trust that? Do I show that to my doctor? Will he laugh at me? Will he not laugh at me? Will he actually recommend that I do these things in the future? Like what on earth am I supposed to do?
Those are all separate problems, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess, when I think about precision medicine, I think about things like the advances in lung cancer treatment, for example. So if you're able to detect biomarkers in patients with lung cancer, all of a sudden you can give them a significantly greater chance of actually having a treatment that could lead to a cure, even for patients with advanced lung cancer, than there was when it was just sort of chemotherapy. So I think there's, and as I've talked to patients with lung cancer, it's amazing to sort of see them go through this process, especially if their lung cancer recurs, to find out there are sort of new options and new possibilities. I think really changes the story, changes the experience in ways, and I think there are a few places where that really kind of targeted medicine, personalized medicine, targeted therapy is starting to become a reality, and more please.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I would also add that, the jury is still out on whether something like liquid biopsy is going to be identifying asymptomatic patients, but just imagine what could be the future where you can find so many patients who have cancers and don't know. So definitely looking forward to that. And oncology is going to be definitely, it seems, I agree with lung cancer example, is going to be the forefront area.
Babies are hot. Really hot. And IVF, in vitro fertilization, now has gotten a huge uptick in seeing what your spawn will look like and act like, be like. Some of it's not accurate yet, right? But they're doing the dating game in essence, right? You bump your phones together, that's got your genomic data, and it gets tossed into the bucket, and they put the finger dipstick in. Yep, it'll be great. I'm being a little facetious, but a partner and I went to did some work with an IVF clinic on Madison Avenue, and there's a reason why I'm saying it's Madison Avenue, and it will be there for a bit, where they're doing this kind of dating game, genomic dating game. They're also doing at hour 8 of fertilization, doing the testing right on the cells to see what's expressing or not. So that's happening now. It's an expensive process. It'll get cheaper, and that is an obvious segue to germline editing. Now people are going to freak out, and yes, but that's part of that's a slippery slope we've started. Years and years ago, the test tube baby is older than I am. I'm not that old, but like she's what, 49, 51, something like that. So that for me, the science part is it will come, and we'll see kids that now we're engineering earlier and earlier and earlier. And that to me is just it's hard not to see that happen. So to just jump it to 2025. Okay, 26.
But the benefit of these therapies is incredible, right? If you think of the other side of cell gene therapies with precision medicine approaches, you could actually, at any stage of mutation in cancer, for example, repair, if, assuming that's something that is validated and clinical trials work out, of course.
I'm going to lob this one over the fence and then run. Government and regulation.
I think we're all going to quit.
No comment.
Thank God they're there.
Yeah, so part of me is, how many people are familiar with HR 676? Okay, that's the single payer bill in the House. 112 have co-sponsored as of now. 3 only out of our 9 Massachusetts reps have signed it. Why haven't all 9 signed it? What are we doing to get them to sign it, to co-sponsor? That's, I forgot, it's the Conyers, right, from Michigan, who started that. So, I mean, for us, we should be looking more and more as what bills are we sponsoring, and what are our reps sponsoring? How are we seeding them new legislation, new bills? That's part of our responsibility as citizens. And it's not just that. I mean, even was it Lindsey Graham yesterday said that, oh yeah, everyone with a precondition should be covered, and we should really do single payer that way. My jaw dropped, because that's not 75% of the population like he thought. He thought the risk pool was like 75% for precondition. Everybody basically has it. So then, of course, a Democrat from West Virginia said no to single payer. But like, we have to work this. We have got to work this individually as citizens, because we can't just rely solely on our representatives to do the work. Sorry for that. Okay.
Machine learning.
I think with machine learning, we get back to this question of the engineers know what to do more than we know how to apply it. I think we really don't know how useful it can be. I think a lot of the machine learning can answer what, but why, and build a narrative. I don't think it's there. So it can provide a CDS, but you know, is it useful? We don't know yet. I don't know.
Well, I just talked about an example. So the caveat is always in healthcare, data are much more complicated, and you need to really deeply understand what you're doing, and it has to make sense at the end of the day that your indicators are really making sense. Otherwise, it's a black box, and as a patient or physician or provider, I mean, you cannot trust that. It's so important to save lives that we can't just trust a black box.
And a lot of machine learning and deep learning is based on for now guidelines or protocols, and it's known that doctors don't necessarily follow guidelines or protocols, and this is because it's part of their experience. It's part of what they're currently doing, what they've observed in the last month, all the knowledge they're building, and it's just not captured by all of the data that's provided that the machine learning is being built on. So we're missing that component.
How soon and in what capacity do you think AI, things like IBM Watson, will have a presence in hospitals, for example?
2020.
But in what capacity? Like, what do you think realistically that would look like? Because obviously we're not going to turn over all of our trust to AI, but do you see a role in it helping, brainstorm ideas with doctors or help with evidence-based care? What role do you see it having?
Oh, I was going to say two things. So IBM Watson is working with physicians, right? So that's key. You need to make sure that, again, you're not developing a black box. And I think it also comes down to integration. So you have to have all the pieces at the baseline so you can build upon them. And so if you cannot integrate into EMRs, and if there's difficulties that you need to address first in order to ensure that it's going to work.
I sort of worry about the black box. Like, I agree. When you say black box, that means closed. To me, it does. And not interrogatable, not measurable. So that freaks me out, because for me, health is too important to be closed. It should be a much more open system. And that should drive some of these. Now, again, when you talk about the machine learning, some of the algorithms and layers are so complex that we can't even make a determination of exactly how that happened, right? So there's a histogram view of that algorithm, and you can't even quite parse it. But guess what? If the machine's getting it right 95, 94, 84% of the time, that's, we have to figure out what that threshold is. Doctors are already the third leading cause of death in the US, right? Are we going to beat that with machines? Probably, right? But again, my pitch is for opening those black boxes so that the public, so that we have an access right into it.
Yeah, let's call it black box with a door, because I agree with you. I think you definitely can get into it, and you don't want to make a very complicated algorithm as long as it's sort of simple, then you can definitely validate it and also ensure that whoever is using it believes in it, right?
I think I agree with that. The comment on that is we'd have to reconsider how workflow is right now. They don't have time to look into this. Even if we provided the door, they don't have time to look into the door, clinicians. So I think that even if we provide them with that information, we have to rethink how they look at it, when they look at it, for what.
It's a good design problem.
Yeah, and the question is really how much better do you have to be? So 95%, is that good enough, or do you know what I mean?
But I think as with all of this, it's coming. So the trick is to figure out how to make use of it effectively, safely, to understand in what context it works and to understand in what context there's still more risk than we're comfortable taking on. But it's happening, so let's figure out how to embrace it.
Your question was, what will AI look like, soonest? How will Watson be applied in the earliest form? I think that the way it can help clinicians right now is help them focus on their patient. It can be used to document, to sort the information they need without them having to do it. So that's the simplest thing you can do, and you can do that tomorrow with, natural language processing, capturing audio, video, and organizing the information and giving them insights that they don't have to worry about. And so they can, spend the time putting their hand on the patient, touching them, talking to them, looking into their eyes.
It's that benefit of operational efficiency that you can solve for, and that's simplistic, more simple data and simpler problem to solve. I completely agree.
Are you suggesting that we turn Watson into a doctor's intern?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's augmented reality. Instead, many people call it augmented, not artificial. I mean, augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
We have just time for one more. This one is actually a surprise one for the panel. I didn't warn them about this. Let's talk about the future of leadership. I'll prime this one because you guys weren't prepared for this. As a consultant, I work with physicians all the time who are departmental directors who are also responsible for patient experience. I think it's an unfair balance of what's being asked of them in the sense that you can't run a department as a departmental leader, manage and be responsible for clinical accuracy at unbelievably high standards, and also be responsible for patient experience when you've never actually been trained in doing so. Physicians go through enormous amounts of training and education, none of it having anything to do with hospitality, or have ever worked in a hotel industry, or ever had to scoop ice cream, things that those who are responsible from a service design perspective on patient experience or on hospitality of guest experience do have to do. Some of the successes I've seen is that those hospitals willing to break through and have others from other industries be responsible for the patient experience are more successful, as opposed to putting that onus on just the physicians themselves. That's my opinion. Nothing?
Aren't you describing how nature works? Like some things die, some things work, some things are great, a lot of things suck. I mean,
not one person can do all the things.
Right, yeah.
But right now that's the case.
So collaboration, right? I mean, back to that principle of you cannot do it yourself. You've been trained for one thing, and every leader that's a good collaborator actually succeeds. So work with others to get there.
Well, you mentioned the clinical leaders potentially, and someone mentioned education before. I think it would be great if we actually funded their education, medical education, and as part of that funding, they have to go to IHS, Indian Health Service, or some kind of rural service for 6 years. It's almost like you're signing up for it. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, but like, what if you got paid to go to medical school for free, and then you had 10 years in the field to have that real experience and say, oh my God, that's how it works? Versus being in the capital ed med of the world, right? Which is, it's amazing. It's, this 1 square mile is what, 29% of healthcare GDP? That's not normal, right? So when they come and lead here, that's one variable. Another thing is actually having in-field like experience at the dipoles. I don't know, maybe again, that's too altruistic.
I mean, we have some success stories where it's a little bit related, where an engineer, physician, and a multifunctional team of folks, marketing person, whoever it is, they can work wonders together and they go and observe together. So and find solutions together. So there's definitely a way to bring in some diversity.
Yeah, it strikes me as interesting too. I think, you know, measuring quality is a thing now. Hospitals have to send out surveys trying to figure out how satisfied were you with your experience. So I think, you know, to the point I was making earlier, as you start to measure things, they take on importance. Someone needs to become responsible for them. They get rolled into reimbursement. They get rolled into all sorts of things. So I think getting to a place where we're deciding what things are important, measuring those things, figuring out how they play into reimbursement and other things, I think is a start and a key part of that process. And then who actually is responsible for doing some of those things will kind of fall out, as opposed to it all falling on one person. But I think, what is it that matters? Let's measure it, and then let's start to figure out who is best suited to actually taking charge of it.
Well, that's 3:15 on the dot. Thanks, everybody. I want to thank the panel very much for your time.